Every Tuesday night, Rachel cried. Big, wet, glassy-eyed tears that always seemed timed to fall when Dr. Keith Harmon looked up from his notepad. I would sit there on that stiff, too small couch, hands resting on my knees, watching my wife break apart with the kind of practiced fragility that drew sympathy from anyone in the room. Anyone but me. It was always about what I didn't do. How I didn't look at her the way I used to. How she felt unseen, unheard, unwanted. To the outside world, and to Dr. Harmon, she was the wounded, heartbroken wife, bravely baring her soul to save a crumbling marriage. But I had started to notice something. She only seemed emotional when she knew someone was watching. Not when we were alone. Not when it was just the two of us. Behind closed doors, Rachel was cold. Mechanical. Touching her felt like touching a mannequin. No anger. No passion. No sadness. Just, nothing. And sitting there in that over-air-conditioned office, I realized I wasn't the only one noticing her performance. Because the man paid to watch her, the one we trusted to guide us back to each other, was the very one she was seducing. I just didn't know it yet. I'm Jeremy. 37 years old. I design software for a living, build systems that make sense of chaos, order out of entropy. But no amount of logic could have prepared me for the slow, grinding disintegration of a marriage I thought was unshakable. Rachel and I had been together for 9 years. We met the old-fashioned way, at a college friend's party, when she spilled red wine on my shirt and laughed like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. I loved her laugh back then. It was reckless and free, a sound that filled a room. She was breathtaking, suntanned skin, green eyes that flashed with mischief, a way of carrying herself that said she could have the world if she wanted it, but for some reason, she had chosen me. Or at least, that's what I believed. The first 5 years were good. Better than good. We built a life, a small but charming house on the east side, a yellow lab named Max, vacations that filled albums with memories. Sure, there were cracks. No marriage is without them. Arguments over money. Stress about my long hours at work. But we had always found our way back to each other. Or so I thought. 6 months ago, Rachel sat me down at the kitchen table. The kitchen where we had painted the walls together. Where she used to dance barefoot while stirring pasta. She told me we needed realignment. A new start. She had been reading books, listening to podcasts. Therapy, she said, could help us remember who we were before life got in the way. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. Because when you've built your life around someone, you don't let go at the first signs of rot. You patch the roof. You shore up the foundation. You fight. And so I agreed. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m., we made the drive downtown to a modest brick building tucked between a bakery and a used bookstore. 3 floors up, down a dimly lit hallway that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and desperation, we sat in Dr. Keith Harmon's office. Dr. Harmon looked exactly like you'd expect a therapist to look, mid-50s, graying at the temples, cardigan sweaters and a voice like warm molasses. He had a way of nodding at all the right moments, mirroring your posture so you felt heard. If therapy was a game, Harmon was a professional player. And from the very first session, I noticed the way his eyes lingered on Rachel just a little too long. The way his mouth twitched in a half-smile when she laughed at her own pain. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to someone like me, who spent his days analyzing patterns, it was there. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. That I was just defensive. Sensitive. Paranoid. After all, she was hurting, wasn't she? And I had been so caught up in work, deadlines, promotions, maybe I had become distant. So I swallowed the doubts. I made the effort. I started leaving work earlier. Scheduling date nights. Relearning the language of touch and attention. Meanwhile, Rachel cried about how invisible she felt. How I made her question her own worth. Dr. Harmon always nodded, always furrowed his brow in concern whenever she spoke. When I spoke, he asked probing questions that made me feel like I was under a microscope. As if her feelings were facts, and my confusion was an indictment. At first, it hurt. Later, it just made me numb. Each week, I tried harder. And each week, she grew colder. The nights got longer. The distance between us, wider. Intimacy became a relic, something that existed only in memory, not in reality. She wore silk pajamas to bed now, not the oversized t-shirts she used to steal from my side of the closet. They looked expensive. Deliberate. But not for me. I watched her disappear, inch by inch, behind a wall of curated sadness and whispered accusations. And somewhere, deep down, a part of me realized that I wasn't watching my wife fall apart. I was watching her move on. It happened on a random Sunday, the kind of forgettable day that doesn't even register until it changes your life. Rachel was rushing out the door, late for a yoga workshop she said she couldn't miss. Her MacBook sat on the kitchen counter, humming quietly, lid half closed, logged into our shared Gmail account. At first, I wasn't looking for anything. Habit more than curiosity pulled me toward it. We used that account mostly for mundane things, therapy appointment reminders, Amazon orders, bills we split out of habit even though our marriage was quietly bleeding out. But there it was. The drafts folder. Dozens of them. Unsent. Waiting. It was like finding a hidden door in a house you thought you knew. And behind that door, a room filled with a different life. The first thing that hit me was the tone of the messages. Not regretful. Not confused. Giddy. Passionate. Vulgar in a way that made my stomach knot. The words weren't written to me. They were for him. For Dr. Keith Harmon. I scrolled in silence, the house pressing in on me, the walls seeming smaller with every click. There were notes about the first time they met alone, how he had made her feel seen again after so long being trapped in a dead marriage. There were whispered promises, plans to travel once everything settled down. Mentions of hotel rooms. Late-night calls. Photos, too. Not explicit, but intimate enough to leave no room for interpretation. Pictures of wine glasses side by side, hands touching just out of frame, a messy hotel bed with a suit jacket draped over a chair. But it wasn't just the affair. It was worse. Nestled between the love notes and the fantasies were pieces of my life. Pieces I had laid bare in that therapy room. Confessions I had made under the assumption of privacy, of safety. Session notes. They hadn't bothered to hide it much. Harmon had written about things I had shared in trust, my childhood fears, my father's drinking, my struggles with confidence after being passed over for a promotion. And Rachel had responded to them like they were secrets stolen from an enemy, not vulnerabilities offered by a husband trying to save his marriage. They mocked me. In half-sentences, inside jokes, carefully twisted observations. The man paid to heal me had handed over the scalpel to my wife and watched her carve me apart. The intimacy between them wasn't accidental. It wasn't messy, desperate passion like you read about in trashy novels. It was strategic. Clinical. They weren't just building a life together, they were building a case. Against me. The depth of the betrayal was something I could feel in my bones. Not just the adultery, but the calculation. They were framing me as the villain of the story they wanted to tell everyone else. A story in which Rachel was the noble survivor, Harmon the empathetic savior, and I the broken, angry man who had driven her into another's arms. It was so obvious in hindsight. The way Rachel had started pushing me to admit darker thoughts in therapy. The way Harmon had subtly encouraged her narrative about my supposed coldness, my lack of emotional intelligence. They hadn't been guiding me back to my marriage. They were guiding me into a confession box. And the only absolution they wanted was their own. The room spun slightly, a dizzy tilt that had nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with the realization that my reality, the life I thought I was living, was a carefully edited version of the truth. One they were controlling. I closed the laptop slowly, the device heavy in my hands. Heavier than the betrayal inside it. I sat there for what felt like hours, the clock ticking in the background, each second louder than the last. My mind wasn't racing. It was terrifyingly clear. Rachel wasn't trying to save our marriage. She was preparing to destroy me. To paint me as unfit. Emotionally abusive. Distant. The husband no woman should have to endure. And Harmon, he wasn't just a bystander. He was her co-conspirator. The judge, the jury, and the executioner rolled into one warm, understanding voice. The intimacy they shared wasn't collateral damage. It was weaponized. Every time she had clutched her chest in therapy, every time Harmon had nodded sympathetically, every moment they had looked at me with manufactured concern, it had been theater. A play performed to an audience of one, me. But what they hadn't accounted for was that the man they thought they were dismantling piece by piece wasn't broken. Not yet. Not by a long shot. I wasn't a patient. I was the target. And targets, once aware, don't sit still. They aim back. I opened the laptop again, my hand steady. I copied everything, every draft, every timestamp, every pixel of betrayal. I archived it on an external drive, one that had never touched our home Wi-Fi network. Then I installed a keylogger, silent, invisible, patient. I wasn't going to confront Rachel. Not yet. The battlefield had been chosen. The game set in motion. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated me. And the first rule of any real fight is simple. Never, ever, let the man you're trying to destroy realize he's at war. Because when he does, you're already losing. I didn't say a word. Not that night. Not the next day. Silence, I realized, was its own kind of power. While Rachel flitted through the house pretending at normalcy, asking about dinner plans, humming absently while scrolling her phone, I moved like a ghost behind her. Each smile she faked, each casual brush of her hand against my shoulder, felt like watching a stage actress who didn't realize the theater had already burned down. I copied everything. Every email. Every saved draft. Every hidden folder they thought they had so cleverly tucked away. I backed it all up onto two different drives, one that lived hidden in the hollow of an old speaker, and another that I locked in my desk drawer at work. The keylogger I installed burrowed itself into her system quietly, recording every keystroke without her knowledge. Passwords. Private chats. Therapy session schedules hastily rearranged to accommodate secret meetings. I became an archivist of my own betrayal. The next phase came naturally, recording the therapy sessions. Our state had one-party consent laws, meaning as long as I knew I was recording, it was perfectly legal. The first time I hit the record button on my smartwatch, a sick sense of satisfaction pooled in my stomach. It felt wrong at first. But then I remembered, I wasn't recording a private conversation. I was recording a crime scene. Week after week, I built my case. While Harmon leaned in with his concerned expressions, while Rachel wiped fake tears from her cheeks, I sat there gathering the ammunition that would tear their carefully constructed world to pieces. But I didn't stop there. I booked my own therapist, one across town, unconnected to Harmon, with no ties to anyone Rachel knew. An older woman named Dr. Miranda Chase, known for her ironclad ethics and no-nonsense approach. Every week, I sat in her sterile, sunlit office and told the truth. The numbness. The suspicion. The gnawing dread I couldn't name yet. How I tried to bridge the gap between Rachel and me, only to be met with a wall of disdain and coldness. How the therapy meant to save us only made me feel more isolated, more blamed. Every word was documented. Clinical notes. Mental health assessments. Detailed, Professional logs of a man struggling in good faith to save a marriage while being systematically dismantled behind his back. It was perfect. Undeniable. Incontrovertible. Because someday, I knew, the story Rachel and Harmon were building, the cold, detached husband narrative, would need to be ripped apart at the seams. And when that moment came, I wouldn't just accuse. I would prove. The longer I waited, the more dangerous the situation became. I knew that. Every extra day was another brick laid in the foundation of whatever legal strategy they were crafting. I saw the way Rachel's behavior shifted, how her smiles grew tighter, her questions more leading. She wasn't trying to reconnect. She was gathering evidence. Planting seeds for the narrative she would harvest in court when she filed for divorce. But the thing about traps is, they can snap shut from either side. The final piece was scheduling one last session with Harmon. I chose the day carefully. A Tuesday, of course, the same day we had always gone. Nothing out of the ordinary to raise suspicion. But this time, there would be no desperate attempts to salvage our marriage. No teary-eyed reflections about lost passion or unmet needs. This time, I would be the surgeon. And Harmon and Rachel would be the patients. The night before the session, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear. Out of anticipation. I packed my bag methodically. 2 copies of the printed evidence. The external hard drive. A small, portable recorder tucked into my jacket pocket, redundancy in case anything went wrong. In the corner of my bedroom, Rachel slept soundly. Or at least she pretended to. I wondered if somewhere, in the back of her mind, she knew it was over. If she sensed the undercurrent of inevitability that had started to hum between us, low and dangerous. Maybe she thought she still had the upper hand. Maybe she believed that the tears she would conjure the next day would be enough to tip the scales back in her favor. But tears can only save you when the audience still believes the act. And tomorrow, I wasn't coming as the audience. I was coming as the executioner. The morning of the final session, the city moved outside our window in a haze of gray and rain. Rachel hummed to herself as she got ready, draping a silk scarf around her neck, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. She caught my reflection in the glass and smiled, a sweet, meaningless gesture that felt almost offensive now. I smiled back. Not because I felt warmth. But because predators always expect their prey to run. Not to smile. Not to walk calmly into the trap, setting it alight around them. As we drove to the office, Rachel chatted about weekend plans. A barbecue one of her friends was hosting. Plans I wasn't invited to, of course. Plans she spoke about casually, as if my absence were natural, expected, even preferable. Each word she spoke was another shovel of dirt thrown onto the coffin she didn't realize was already built. When we arrived, Harmon's office looked the same as it always had. The same faded couch. The same musty carpet. The same framed diplomas that had once reassured me and now felt like props in a hollow play. Rachel settled into her usual seat, crossing her legs elegantly, smoothing the lines of her dress. Harmon looked up from his notes and smiled warmly. The same smile he probably reserved for all his victims. The same smile he probably used the first time he convinced himself that crossing the line with a patient's wife was something he could justify. I leaned back, heart steady, breath slow. This wasn't therapy. Not anymore. This was the final scene. And the curtain was about to fall. She had dressed up for it. I noticed immediately. A navy blue dress that clung just right, hair pinned up loosely, strands framing her face like she was stepping onto a magazine cover, not into a therapy session. And the perfume, something new, floral and sharp, hung in the small space between us like a warning sign only I could smell. Rachel settled into her usual seat, legs crossed, her smile polished to a mirror shine. Empathy flooded her features, an actress getting ready to deliver her final performance. Her hands folded delicately in her lap, her body angled just enough toward Dr. Harmon to signal loyalty, intimacy, trust. Harmon cleared his throat, flipping through his notepad as if preparing for just another night of managing the broken pieces of a marriage he had personally smashed apart. Rachel began the show. The words were familiar by now, worn down from repetition. I was cold. I was emotionally unavailable. I didn't care enough, didn't love enough, didn't show up when it mattered. She said she didn't feel safe anymore, that ominous phrase that lands with the subtle force of a guillotine in any conversation about a relationship. Harmon leaned forward, his face creasing into a look of deep, manufactured concern. But this time, I didn't sit in silence. This time, I didn't let the room fill with the thick, sticky narrative they had carefully woven around me. Instead, I reached into my coat. Slowly. Deliberately. The motion alone shifted the energy in the room. Rachel's words faltered mid-sentence, her polished demeanor cracking just slightly at the edges. Harmon's pen stopped scribbling. His eyes sharpened. From the inside pocket, I pulled out a thick black binder and set it down on the low coffee table between us. The thud of it hitting the wood sounded louder than it should have, like the gavel stroke at the end of a trial. Rachel blinked, caught off guard. Her perfectly lined lips parted slightly, confusion creeping in beneath her mask. I flipped the binder open. Page after page of betrayal unfolded before them. Printed emails, time-stamped and highlighted. Screenshots from the drafts folder she had so carelessly abandoned. Notes and transcripts where my private admissions, my fears, my regrets had been twisted into inside jokes and backhanded commentary. Their names littered the pages like graffiti across a battlefield. The dates. The hotel receipts. The late-night meetups framed as consultations. Photographic evidence, grainy but unmistakable, captured them together. Small, damning details, Rachel wearing the same scarf she claimed she bought for a friend's birthday. Harmon in casual clothes he would never wear to a professional meeting. Across the room, Harmon's mouth pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Rachel's knuckles turned white against the fabric of her dress. I wasn't finished. From my other pocket, I produced a small flash drive and slid it across the table, letting it spin once before it came to a rest between us like a judge's final verdict. The contents of that drive had already been sent to the state licensing board earlier that morning, neatly catalogued and backed up in multiple locations. Everything was out of their control now. Their carefully curated narrative collapsed under the weight of hard evidence. Rachel turned pale, the blood draining from her face so fast it was almost mesmerizing. Her shoulders, always so proudly squared, sagged inward, as if the air had been punched from her lungs. Harmon, for the first time in all those months, looked powerless. The easy confidence that had dripped from him in every session, every carefully placed word, evaporated. Beads of sweat formed along his hairline, unnoticed but unmistakable. I stood up. Not to leave. Not yet. I walked over to my bag and pulled out a laptop, setting it neatly on the corner of Harmon's desk. The screen came to life instantly, a familiar video conferencing app already open. The name on the call waiting screen was small but clear, State Ethics Board Liaison, Dr. Susan Keller. I had scheduled the meeting days ago. I had sent her the documentation. I had prepared her for what she was about to see. The countdown began. 5 seconds. 4. 3. 2. The Zoom tone chimed through the cramped, sterile office, a final warning bell before the fall. On the screen, framed in clean white walls and government insignia, appeared Dr. Susan Keller, stern-faced, silver-haired, and carrying the weight of decades spent cleaning up messes exactly like this. She wasted no time. Her questions came sharp and fast, slicing through the thick, choking silence that had settled over the room. Questions about professional boundaries. About ethics. About the sacred trust between patient and therapist, shattered beyond recognition. Harmon sat there, a husk of the man who had once wielded so much quiet authority, the color draining from his face with every word from Dr. Keller's mouth. He tried to speak once, a dry rasp barely forming in his throat, but no words came. Nothing that could undo what had already been set in motion. Rachel wasn't ready to surrender. She leaned forward, her voice shaking just enough to seem convincing, tears welling at just the right moment. She spun a story, fragile and trembling, about manipulation and blurred lines. How she had been vulnerable. How Harmon had taken advantage of her pain. It would have been compelling, maybe even believable, if not for the cold, hard evidence laid bare on the table between us. Timestamps that traced the start of the affair back to the earliest days of our therapy. Emails that showed planning, not confusion. Mocking jokes made long after any conceivable boundaries had already been knowingly crossed. Rachel wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator. And no carefully placed tears could erase that. The screen flickered as Dr. Keller documented everything, her face a granite mask of professional disappointment. Rachel and Harmon sat, frozen and exposed, while the full weight of their betrayal was catalogued and prepared for judgment. They were finished. But I wasn't. When the session ended, I gathered the flash drive and placed it neatly into a padded envelope addressed to Dr. Keller's office. Insurance. Not that it was needed anymore. Then I walked out into the rain, the cold droplets soaking through my jacket almost immediately. The city around me buzzed with normalcy, oblivious to the small war that had just been won in that tiny office upstairs. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I found a corner booth in a diner 2 blocks away, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop. The folder of evidence sat heavy on the screen. One click. One upload. I posted it anonymously to a well-known therapist whistleblower subreddit. Attached the key evidence. Included a plain, factual recounting of the betrayal, how therapy had been weaponized, how the system meant to heal had been twisted into a personal playground for a cheating spouse and a corrupt therapist. I signed it simply, Patient Zero. Within hours, it caught fire. Comments flooded in, some horrified, some furious, many painfully familiar. Other men, other women too, sharing their stories of betrayal hidden behind therapy's safe facade. By morning, the post had been picked up by local news outlets. By the end of the week, national media had latched onto the scandal with rabid fascination. Therapist ethics blogs plastered Harmon's photo across their homepages, the word disgraced stamped over the headlines like a brand he would never escape. His license was revoked within 2 weeks. Quietly. Efficiently. One brief notice from the licensing board, gross ethical misconduct, license permanently revoked. Rachel's fall was slower but no less brutal. The nonprofit she had worked for, an organization built on integrity, community, and ethical leadership, couldn't scrub her name off their board fast enough once the truth surfaced. Emails leaked. Screenshots circulated. Her carefully cultivated image as a philanthropist, an advocate for healing and hope, shattered in a matter of days. The job was gone. The invitations to charity galas and leadership luncheons. Gone. Her friends, the ones who had sipped wine with her while discussing my supposed failings, scattered like rats from a sinking ship. She tried to spin the story, of course. Tried to paint herself as the wounded woman taken advantage of by a manipulative therapist. But the evidence didn't care about spin. The truth had already spoken. And me? I didn't sit quietly in the shadows, nursing my wounds and disappearing into obscurity. I built something. A podcast. A series. Patient Zero. A raw, unfiltered exploration of how therapy can be twisted by manipulators. How men, especially, are often told to open up, be vulnerable, only to have those vulnerabilities weaponized against them. Each episode told a story. Stories of betrayal. Of false narratives. Of the deep, unspoken wounds carried by those who had been burned by the very places meant to heal them. I didn't name Rachel. I didn't have to. The story resonated because it was bigger than one man's revenge. It was about a system that had cracks running deep beneath its polished surface. And once the truth slipped through those cracks, there was no stuffing it back in. 6 months later, I sat on a talk show couch, bright lights glaring, cameras rolling. Not as a broken man seeking sympathy. Not as a footnote in someone else's downfall. But as the man who turned his own betrayal into a broadcast heard by millions. The interviewer asked about the fallout, about the pain, the cost. I smiled politely, gave the stock answers about healing, moving forward. The truth, the real truth, was simpler. There is no greater peace than knowing you have nothing left to hide, nothing left to lose. Only truth, stripped bare and standing tall. Rachel called once. Late at night. A voicemail, her voice fragile, trembling with something that might have been regret or might have just been the bitter taste of losing. She said she wished I had just talked to her. That maybe things could have been different. But there was nothing left to say. Nothing left to salvage. Because now, the whole world was listening. And the story they heard wasn't hers anymore. It was mine.